And basically on the river, we jam it in using the blockers also. And I went for a 250-ish% overbet and decided to go for a big overbet. And we decided to throw our stacking, blocking. So again, it's a similar situation where we should just go very big. Hello my poker friends, and welcome back to another video here on the Poker Ambition channel, in which today we are going to be looking at triple barrel hand histories. I went through my database and selected a couple of triple barrel spots that I wanted to share with you guys. Spoiler alert, we are often going to make some very big bets with not the strongest holdings, so let's hope they fold. If you want to know a little bit more about the theory behind bluffing, I did make a theoretical video earlier in this channel, so go check that out if you haven't seen that one. Also, if you did like the way I made my river bets, please give this video a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel, as we will be releasing way more content very soon. And without further ado, let's get into the first hand. We face a button open, we're in a small with pocket tens and we 3-bet. We see a flop of king jack 7 and we decide to go for a little bet. The idea behind this is that if we 3-bet linear range from the small blind, boards like this hit us pretty well, and we could kind of simplify our strategy by betting a lot for a very small sizing. It is a two-tone board, so in general it's probably a good idea to implement some checks. If I had, for example, tens without a club, maybe that's a good candidate for a check, but I think tens with a club plays fine as a bet, as there could be some potentials on later streets. Spoiler alert, since the turn is now a queen, villain calls, and we decide to use our tens as a barrel. Now, the idea behind this is pretty simple. If you look at the nuts, well, the nuts is 9-10 or ace-10, and we have two tens, so it's way less likely that villain has the nuts. So in general, you could say that his fold equity goes up given the cards that we have. If we check, most likely if he bets, we do have quite a high equity hand. I think we should probably continue, and if we're going to continue anyways, I would probably prefer to use the betting line, as we could get bluffed some of the time, and I don't think we can just simply call down in our blockers. So I think the barrel is good. In position calls, and basically on the river we jam it in using the blockers. Also think it's hard for us here to show up with a lot of natural bluffs. I think probably good bluffing candidates would be a hand like ace-ace of spades or ace-ace of hearts. Those would be kind of the most intuitive bluffs, I would say. If we have, let's say, for example, ace-ace of clubs, it's usually not the preferred bluff, as we are blocking hands that villain is folding. So I think overall it's going to be quite hard for villain to call down, unless he has like a hand that beats my value range, which is probably maybe the thinnest hand would be aces, I guess. He calls. Unfortunately, he does show up with the king 9, which is a hand that doesn't beat any value. You could even say that it kind of blocks some of my bluffs, as nines with a club, for example, would be a hand that I could play in a similar fashion. So yeah, I'm not really sure what I think about this call. Like I said, I think it is a tough spot for the small blind to be over bluffing. I mean, he does block the 9-10. He blocks some good hands in king, queen, king, jack type of holdings, so it's kind of whatever. But I definitely do like my bluff. Moving on to the next hand, we have 7-10 suited on the button. We open, Pokerkluka in the small blind folds, MMAsherdog defends the big blind. We see a flop of king 5-8, king high, rainbow flop usually favors the button, so I'm going to be doing quite a lot of 1/3 c-betting. MMAsherdog does call, turn is a jack, he checks, and now on the turn, I think it's a spot that we're not going to have the highest c-bet frequency, as we already c-bet quite a big portion of our range on the flop. MMAsherdog has folded most of his air, so he showed that he has an interest in the pot, usually leading to betting a little bit less with a bigger sizing. I went for a 3/4 here instead of an overbet. I think overbet is definitely the biggest chunk of sizing that we will use here on the turn. However, I do think there are some hands that could benefit from a 3/4, and in general I'm not a big fan of using terms like, oh, I always bet 1/3 here, or I do range this, range that. Yes, on the turn, the majority of your bets will be overbets, but I definitely think there's benefits in always at least considering a split. So I will split here between a 3/4 and an overbet, and certain hands will benefit from that. I don't have a great draw. I mean, it's only a gutter, so I think this hand is fine in a smaller sizing. MMAsherdog calls, and on the river there's an ace, and he checks, and now we have to consider what to do. And I went for a 250-ish% overbet, and the idea behind this is quite simple. Take the nuts again, like a hand like Queen 10. For what it's worth, we block it a little bit. If he did float Queen 10 of spades on the flop, and if he didn't 3-bet that pre-flop. So Queen 10 of diamonds, I think, is less likely, could check raise the turn. And in general, I don't think he has Queen 10 offsuit here on the river. And we can definitely have Queen 10 offsuit, so it gives us a certain range advantage. And usually how you capitalize on a certain capped range from your opponent and an uncapped, not advantage range for us, the hero, you should usually just size really big. You could even make an argument for just shipping my stack in. I think that is definitely a valid option. So you could almost say that I kind of made a mistake here by not going even bigger. But I think it's kind of whatever. I think not betting is a big mistake. Betting 3/4 is a mistake. And then at least going 150 plus, I think, is just in general a very good strategy in this kind of situations. Okay. He folds, okay, which is finally a good result, as the last time we kind of bluffed off a stack. This is kind of the thing with bluffing, right? The times that you get called, you lose a stack, and the times that you don't get called, you win $511. So it has to work quite often. Next hand, we have a certain similar situation. We're up against the Sherdog again. We open the Queen 10 on the button, he calls. Flop comes A7-5. It's a board that we shouldn't be c-betting actually at too high of a frequency. It's an often over c-bet board. I just did decide to c-bet with the Queen 10, which I don't think we should do all of the time, but it's fine. Turn is a king. And again, it's a sort of a similar spot as the previous hands, where I think the majority of my bets here should be overbets. And probably, to be honest, in this exact spot, maybe overbet only could make sense. But again, there are some circumstances where you would want to size down. I went for a 3/4, which in this case, I do actually think is a mistake. I think overbet here is definitely better. MMAsherdog calls, and the river is a queen. And now we do have some showdown value, as we did hit a queen. The queen is not a club, so he could have maybe floated ahead like Queen 9 of clubs that we win against. He could have a 7x of clubs that we're winning against. But I think the majority of his range is probably going to be a king or an ace. And we get a kind of similar spot as earlier, where it's very unlikely that our opponent has the nuts, and it's very likely that we have the nuts. As Jack 10, it could definitely be in our c-betting range. I think that's one of the candidates that I would always c-bet, as it can turn some good gutters. Like basically an 8 or higher gives me a gutter or a pair. Unlike Queen 10, which on an 8 or 9 doesn't improve to a gutter. That's why I think Queen 10 is probably a better check on the flop than a hand like 10 Jack, for example. And on the river here, we're kind of using our blockers, you could say. I think King 10, for example, could actually be a potential hero call of him. Ace 10 is definitely a good hand for him to call. And we're blocking some absolute strong hands in King Queen and Queen 7. And Ace Queen, if he did call that some of the time. So again, it's a similar situation where we should just go very big, okay? And give him a lot of headaches. And he did indeed fold again, which is going to happen quite often, guys, because fold percentages in these kind of scenarios are going to be really high. We're overbetting. The run-it is quite favorable for us. So yeah, if you're out of position, there's not much you can do. And again, I think it's hard for us to be bluffing, as we have to be turning certain hands like this type of holdings into a bluff, or on the turn we have to be barreling hands like Jack 8, which are basically nothing. Next hand, fellow poker ambition master Explode opens the button. We're not afraid. We 3-bet the ace-3 suited, as it looks quite pretty. He calls. Flop 3-8-9. We can play this in multiple ways. I decide to start off with a 1/3 c-bet with my 3 and kind of go from there. Definitely could be arguments made on this flop for a split betting strategy. Ace-3 with hearts. Ace-3 of clubs, for example, I don't mind betting big, but I think Ace-3 of hearts with some extra potential. Basically, you don't really mind playing later streets, as we will often turn more equity. Explode calls, and now on the turn, it's quite interesting what to do. Basically, if we check any bets, I think we always have a fold. And I actually decided to go for a barrel, which I do actually like. The showdown value, yes, we do have a made hand, but showdown value in this spot is quite terrible. You could even make an argument that we sometimes get called by worse, mainly I think ace-10, ace-jack type of holdings could call us on the turn. He could fold better, like 4s, 5s. So overall, I think it's just a fine play. Comparing DVs of check and bet, I think betting is fine. He calls, and now on the river there's a 10. And I think this is a spot that people often kind of choke. As I mean, the imposition's perceived range has quite a lot of jack-X, it's quite a lot of 2 pairs, but I actually did decide to go for it. I mean, we're still blocking pocket 3s, which obviously you could almost say is a bluff catcher, but I mean, 3-bet pot, people find it hard to fold sets. We do block the ace-jack. If he had like ace-jack or hearts, that he would have played that way, so our blockers sort of count. We don't really block a lot of hands that could fold. Maybe you could make an argument that we're blocking ace-queen, which is not very favorable. But I think, again, if we use kind of psychology from the buttons perspective, I don't really have much natural bluffs again, as I think I would have to be turning a 10 into a bluff, like a hand like king 10. Ace-10 would then be my primary sort of good bluffing candidates, I guess. And actually, remember, he thought about it for quite some time. He did end up calling with the 9-10, which, I mean, again, the hands that you decide to call here with, I don't think are as important as just putting your opponent on a hand that could bluff and seeing if he's capable of bluffing. Which he did give me the credit to show up with bluffs in this scenario, so shout out to the explode. And we unfortunately lost another stack, but again, I do think I like the way I played this hand, especially because I kind of know how my opponent thinks, and I was kind of trying to take advantage of that. But some people are just too good to bluff and they out-level you. 10-4, and now you might be saying, are we going to raise it 10-4? No, this is actually a triple barrel spot where we got limped in by the small blind. He decides to check the flop, which I think he should do at a very high frequency. We're quite deep, and the board has an advantage for the imposition, as we will be having 5 deuce off, 5-3 off, 4-6 off type of holdings most of the time. We could sometimes also raise some of these holdings pre-flop, but in general, I think also we have a 4x advantage, a 6x advantage. So starting with a lot of checking from the ex-cooler man's position, I think is good. Therefore, we should probably do a lot of betting, and he should just be do a lot of folding. That's kind of the nature of the spot. He now indeed check calls, so he has shown that he has some interest. The turn, I think a 3 actually improves us quite well, as I think we're going to be betting a lot of 3s already on the flop, as there are some value / protection considerations, and we can bet a lot of 3x because we have such an advantage on this board. So I decided to follow up my aggression, decided to go for what is this, like 150% pot. He did decide to call, which I think he could still do with hands that will have trouble folding trouble on the river, mainly still I think some ace highs, a hand with a 6 in it, like a king 6, which does have some showdown value given how ranges look in a limp pot. And on the river is a king. Now obviously we don't anymore bring from king 6 or ace king. And also, if you look at now at our value betting range, basically we're not betting a 5 anymore, which we could definitely still be betting on the turn. Basically, we're saying we have a 3 or better. And I think this is always a good idea when you try to figure out which side you're going to bet, is kind of figure out how thin you're going, how much possible bluffs you have, and then kind of go bigger accordingly. So in this case, yeah, we're going to bet a 3 or better. We do have quite a lot of potential bluffs, so I did decide to go for a big overbet. I think actually in hindsight, I think we should probably even go a little bit bigger. given the nature of the spot. But I would say I did do my best to make him fold. But I would have liked to see us go a little bit bigger. And he did sniff out the bluff. To be fair, he did have a blocker to a full house. If he has a 4 or a 6, that kind of goes either way. Yes, he's blocking a straight, but he's also blocking my most likely bluffs. I mean, he has 3 pair. In general, 3 pair is a good call or raise on rivers, so can't blame him. We tried, didn't work, but I don't think I'm really aiming a hand like king deuce to fold. So I still like my play, but I do think going a little bit bigger would have maybe gotten the job done. Here we face an open on the button, a 3-bet from the small blind. I decided to go for a cold 4-bet with the ace queen, so far pretty standard. GODofHU heads up, decides to call. Flop is 8-8-6, which I think in general, yeah, we kind of have 9s plus, and he doesn't, so a huge advantage. He does have some 8x advantage, I would say. Like, it's more likely that he has a hand like 8-7 suited than us, or 6s or 8s, but I think overall this is just a very good board for us. So we c-bet, he calls. Turn is a king, which is a very good turn. I think we can basically barrel sort of range as 9s, 10s, jacks, etc. They all benefit from some protection and can get some value. So I think barreling sort of range for a small sizing here is pretty good. We do have the ace of diamonds, which in general, if you have the ace of diamonds and there's 2 diamonds on the board, you already know if you look ahead that if another diamond is coming in, we kind of have to not bluff. And actually another diamond did come in, he called twice, and we decided to throw our stacking, blocking aces, blocking ace queen of diamonds, ace jack of diamonds, ace 10 of diamonds type of holdings. I think he's gonna have a very hard time with his hands like 9s, 10s, 7s, 5s, 6-5 suited type of holdings. So I definitely like my bluff here. And actually, unlike the other bluffs, in this case, we're risking 5.7k for 3.5, so it has to work less often. So I definitely think this is a good bluff. We did, however, get snapped off, and he did have the aces. He did trap us, and he wins a nice 12.8k pot. Unlucky for us. But I do like my triple. And I think the main takeaway from this is that a hand like this is definitely a good hand to double barrel to triple on a diamond run out.